Hi folks, this is Abel James, and thank you so much for listening to this special edition of the Fat Burning Man Show. I'm actually coming at you from Denver, Colorado. I'm on the road in a makeshift hotel room recording studio, but I needed to fit this interview in with a man named Jeffrey Smith, and this is all about GMOs, and obviously with Proposition 37 coming up on Election Day in California, this is an issue that needs to be talked about. We have the right to know what's in our food. And right now, there are all sorts of shenanigans in our food supply, and we deserve better. So our guest today is Jeffrey Smith, one of the world's leading authorities on the health effects of genetically engineered foods. And he actually just put out a documentary that's free to watch until Election Day called Genetic Roulette, which is all about the health effects of GMOs and genetically engineered food. So I highly encourage you to check that out. You can get the link to watch it free at fatburningman.com. I'll put it in the show notes. So in today's show, Jeffrey and I talk about how genetically engineered foods currently in our food supply are linked to tumors, genetic abnormalities, and leaky gut, how back-scratching between government agencies and chemical companies puts your health at risk, the truth behind Monsanto's massive $1 million a day misinformation campaign, and how you can avoid genetically engineered foods. All right, let's go talk to Jeffrey. All right, folks, today we're here with Jeffrey Smith, the director of the Institute for Responsible Technology and one of the world's leading authorities on the health effects of genetically engineered foods, Mr. Jeffrey Smith. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Absolutely. So it was actually one of my listeners that sent me your documentary, Genetic Roulette, which is an informative and an extremely disturbing look at the health and environmental effects of genetically engineered foods. So can you give my listeners an idea of why genetically engineered foods might not be quite as harmless as we're led to believe?
Well, we're led to believe that it's harmless by the influence of companies like Monsanto, who are the makers of most of the GM crops. And it was Monsanto's former attorney, Michael Taylor, who was in charge of policy at the FDA, which claimed that the agency was not aware of information showing that GMOs were significantly different, and therefore no testing or labeling was necessary.
Wow.
And that's been the party line, but it turns out it was based on a false statement in the policy, that in fact the overwhelming consensus among the scientists working at the FDA were that GMOs were not only different but dangerous, and they had repeatedly warned their superiors about allergies or toxins or new diseases and nutritional problems, but they were ignored and their message was even denied in this policy by Michael Taylor, who later became Monsanto's vice president and is now back at the FDA as the U.S. food safety czar.
Jeez. That is so crazy how they're all kind of in bed together.
Absolutely. In fact, it's hard to know where the administration ends and the biotechnology industry begins, because it's not just in the FDA, it's in the USDA and several aspects of government, and not just this administration, but the previous administrations. And so they have been promoting the agenda of biotechnology explicitly. In fact, the FDA is specifically mandated to promote biotech, and therefore we have this conflict of interest at the highest level, and we are suffering as a result.
Yeah. So just for people who aren't really aware, what is a genetically engineered food?
You take genes from one species, typically bacteria or viruses, but it's also the humans and animals, and you force it into the DNA of other species. In the crops we have genetically engineered Roundup-ready soybeans, for example, engineered not to die when sprayed with Roundup herbicide. Monsanto sells the Roundup herbicide, the weed killer, as well as the seeds as a package. Then we have the corn and cotton that's engineered to produce its own toxic insecticide. A soil bacterium gene is inserted, and that is produced in every cell of the plant, which are registered pesticides, and they break open the stomach of insects to kill them. Now, those are the major commercialized crops, but they've also released genetically modified mosquitoes in the Cayman Islands. They want to introduce genetically modified salmon. In fact, the stated goal of Monsanto and the biotech industry is to replace nature, to eliminate the products of the billions of years of evolution and turn everything into designer genes, designer organisms designed for greater profit and control.
That is so wacky. Mother Nature is a pretty smart lady. She doesn't seem to like it when we fiddle with things, especially in the in Genetic Roulette. What was it? It was spiderweb proteins in goats or something like that?
Yeah. You take spider genes, put it into goats, and hope they they can milk the goat to get spider web protein to make bulletproof vests.
That is...
It's so strange, but it's true.
You can't make this stuff up. That is...
No, not indeed.
Totally bananas. So...
Don't ask me what they're doing about bananas now.
Yeah.
Beans and bananas.
So, talking about BT corn, when it was approved, as I understand, both Monsanto and the EPA assured everyone that the toxin produced by the plants would hurt only insects, but they're basically saying when bugs eat this, their stomachs explode and they die immediately, but it's perfectly safe for humans. It seems like there's something wrong with that.
And because they assume that it's safe for humans, they don't have to test it in humans. They just say, take the BT toxin. So for those that don't know, BT, or Bacillus thuringiensis, is a soil bacterium. And when you gather up the bacteria and you put it in a spray form, you can use it even as an organic farmer to kill certain insects, and then it washes off and biodegrades within a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
However, they take the gene from the bacterium and they make some changes in it so it's more toxic and more concentrated, and they put it into the cells of corn and cotton plants. And they claim, without doing any studies, that this new rejiggered version is going to be performing as benignly as the toxic spray, and the toxic spray turns out to be not so benign because it can cause immune system reactions and organ and tissue damage in mice, and it can cause immune responses in humans. But they ignore the peer-reviewed published studies. The EPA ignores its own scientific advisory panel and goes ahead and says, we can put this toxin directly into the food supply because we have assumptions. And those assumptions turn out to be completely false.
Mm-hmm.
This year, the Journal of Applied Toxicology actually applied the BT toxin from Monsanto's corn to human cells, and it turns out that it does poke holes in the human cells, and the authors say it appears to be the same kind of mechanism that's used to kill insects. And the other assumption by the biotech industry and the EPA is that the BT toxin is destroyed in the digestive process of humans and mammals, and that proved wrong last year when it was found in the blood of 93% of pregnant women and 80% of their unborn fetuses.
Yeah, that is so disturbing. I certainly don't want someone poking holes in all of my cells. That doesn't sound healthy to me.
And if you think about what leaky gut might do, I mean,
right.
I don't know what your position is on leaky gut, but I've talked to a lot of different physicians
mm-hmm.
and scientists who link it to a whole host of diseases and disorders, which they see on the rise in the U.S., and they think that BT toxin may be the main cause.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's some of those that you bring up were multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, and multiple forms of cancer, which is certainly on the rise.
Even autism has been linked to leaky gut in terms of
mm-hmm.
correlational evidence. And it's also linked to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, food allergies, autoimmune disease, inflammation of all types. And the concept of BT toxin in the food supply, poking holes in human cells, is bad enough. But when you combine it with the earlier study from 2004 in Nature Biotechnology, showing that genes from soybeans transferred into the DNA of the gut bacteria living inside our intestines and may have continued to function. This means long after we stop eating a GMO, we may have these foreign proteins produced continually inside our digestive tract. What is the foreign protein produced by the BT gene? It's this toxin. And if we eat a corn chip, and if the BT gene transfers to the gut bacteria and turns it into a living pesticide factory, that may explain why inflammatory bowel disease is up 42% since GMOs were introduced, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and all these leaky gut symptoms may be related to the colonization of our gut bacteria by Monsanto's genetically modified pesticide-producing corn genes.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because the issue of leaky gut wasn't really talked about until recently. This is something that I know in our circles of ancestral health is linked to all sorts of health problems, as well as obesity and other sorts of dysfunction on a from a metabolic standpoint. So obviously that's not a good thing, but it's not just corn chips that we're talking about here. Genetically engineered foods are actually all over the place. As I understand, there are 9 primary food crops, but their derivatives are in over, is it 70% of supermarket foods?
I would say that. Yeah, no one has done an exact count because there's thousands and thousands. I've always wanted to have a high school science project where all the kids go and actually figure out the exact number. And the key is that soy and corn and sugar from sugar beets are practically omnipresent in processed foods.
Yeah.
This is canola oil and cottonseed oil. And those five are the major genetically modified crops. So you look at soy lecithin, maltodextrin, dextrose, soy protein, corn syrup, etc. These populate the boxed and packaged foods.
Mm-hmm.
So to avoid GMOs, you often have to create a strategy to buy organic, buy products that say non-GMO, or avoid these at-risk ingredients.
Yeah. Even I get tricked by this stuff. I eat small scale, local, shop at farmers markets, go to Whole Foods, because it's a fairly good option for me when I'm in Austin, Texas, or traveling. And I picked up a bunch of these. I love chocolate. Obviously, that's one of the things that I eat a lot of, probably too much. And there was this one, I think it was like endangered species or something like that. And I don't think it said organic on it, but it was right next to all the organic ones, and it looked organic. So we picked up like 5 of them, all these different flavors. And as we're eating it, I'm looking at the ingredients. I turn it over, and it has I presume to be GMO soy lecithin in it, and also sugar from sugar beets, which I would imagine is also GMO. So it's pretty hard to escape this stuff.
Yeah, I know. I have a shopping guide online called non-GMOshoppingguide.com, and it has an iPhone application also that's free called Shop No GMO. Fortunately, there's over 4,000 products that have been verified by a third party, the Non-GMO Project, as being non-GMO.
Mm-hmm.
However, as you and I both travel a great deal, navigating among the options becomes an interesting challenge. I've traveled 187 days last year. I'll beat that record by a long shot this year because I'm in California for most of this part of the year, working to try and get passage of Prop 37, the labeling of GMOs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very familiar with avoiding GMOs in restaurants and shopping in healthy supermarkets as well.
Right. So let's talk about this a little. Our food supply, it seems, is controlled by profit-driven chemical companies. And as we know, there isn't a great deal of money in telling people not to eat things. And if you want to find the truth, as one of my past guests remarked, you should really follow the money. So what are the main motivators of chemical companies? I feel fairly comfortable saying it's probably not your health.
Well, the thing is, there's a tremendous amount of money in the food trade. It's the largest dollar volume of any commodity traded, even more than oil when you add the food up. And when you control the seeds, you control the food. And if you control the seeds, you can also dictate that farmers have to buy certain chemicals with those seeds. The biotech industry wants to deploy a technology called Terminator technology, not yet commercialized, which would allow genetically engineered seeds to be sterile. And their stated goal is to thrust this upon the 1.4 billion farmers in the world that save seeds, mostly in developing countries. Now, what that will do is it'll force the farmers to buy their seeds from the limited number of genetics found in catalogs, so it will enrich the seed companies and also sell the associated chemicals, but it will devastate food security and farmer independence. From food security, I mean this, that in a time of global climate change, what we need is diversity in our food supply so that we can have the seeds that will function under different types of climate and geography. What the biotech industry is willing to do is to destroy most of that biodiversity in order to sell more seeds. So, yes, they're not motivated by anything that is logical, anything that is based on nature, and they're willing to sacrifice health clearly for benefits. And you can see this in Monsanto's own history, where they were convicted and fined $700 million for basically poisoning the people of Anniston, Alabama, next to their factory, which produced PCBs. And when they hired a consultant who put a fish in a local river, and within seconds it floated to the top, shed its skin, and spurted blood, the response by the executive of Monsanto in a memo to that and other data showing that they were poisoning the town was indicative of their motivation. They said, we can't afford to lose $1 of business. So unable to lose $1 of business, they were willing to sacrifice the lives of the people in Anniston, Alabama. They also said that Agent Orange was safe, and an EPA investigator said that, in fact, they had rigged their research, submitted false samples, and done fraudulent research in order to deny payment to the Vietnam veterans. They said that DDT was safe. In fact, I talked to a former scientist at Monsanto who said that 3 of his colleagues refused to drink milk after doing the safety studies on the milk from cows treated with bovine growth hormone, Monsanto's genetically engineered drug. These guys would only drink organic milk, and one bought his own cow, so he was absolutely sure he wasn't drinking the stuff that was adulterated by Monsanto's own products.
Yeah. And one thing that you brought up that I urge my listeners and clients to understand is that scientific studies are not as reliable as we would hope. And in some cases, the research is rigged. So can you comment a bit on that?
Sure. There's a very good and excellent example of how the biotech industry rigs their research by using very short feeding studies. They use 90-day feeding studies, feeding animals maybe 33% of corn or soy, and then they specifically rig the research, change the control group, use poor statistics, sometimes overcook samples or dilute, and then if they still find problems, they try and dismiss them with non-scientific arguments, claiming without justification that the changes are not biologically significant, or even if they're statistically and biologically significant, they say, well, they're still within the normal range of parameters found in that particular species, which is not an excuse that people ever made before in animal feeding studies. They compared the controls to the treated group. Now, what happened last month, in September of 2012, a French team released the research of a study that went beyond the 90 days for rats. And what they did is they fed rats genetically modified corn that was engineered not to die when sprayed with Roundup herbicide, so it was Roundup Ready corn. Plus they fed them the Roundup Ready corn without being sprayed, so it was just testing the effects of the genetic engineering. And they also tested rats with just the Roundup and no corn, spiked in their water supply at levels well below that considered legal and safe in the United States. All 3 test groups, whether it was Roundup, Roundup Ready corn with Roundup, and the corn without, developed massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. And the tumors and major problems did not arise within the 90 days, but the next month. The month after which the industry has already shut its doors and said, oh, the rats are fine, we can feed the stuff to humans. Now, this was such a powerful study, with up to 80% of the female rats getting tumors, mostly of mammary glands, that Russia, within days, banned the genetically modified corn. Kyrgyzstan banned it yesterday. And the biotech industry is freaking out and pouring such disinformation onto the airwaves. Their first response is, oh, they must have used the wrong rats. Because the sprayed gully rats are prone to getting cancer. Well, they ignored the fact that the controls had a fraction of the cancer of the treated group, and they ignored the fact that Monsanto used sprayed gully rats to get their corn and Roundup approved. Then they said, oh, the controls were too small. They should have had more controls. They should only had 10 from females and 10 males in the controls. Well, that's exactly what Monsanto uses at most. So
really?
They could not find any real statistical problems or real methodological problems, but they were so loud in their megaphone, continually saying the same thing, that it's hard to get coverage on this very important study because the reporters are confused and say that it's discredited.
Yeah. And there's another issue that I want to talk to you about. In our country, anyway, food substances are safe until proven unsafe, and that doesn't seem right. As you mentioned, some of these other countries aren't really on board with this. So why is it that GMOs are rejected in some countries but allowed in the U.S.?
It's an interesting question. It has to do with the precautionary principle, but also it has to do a lot with the influence of Monsanto in this country and around the world. In reality, Europe has not rejected genetically modified food from a legal position, but has rejected it from a market position. And it's not the government that rejects GM ingredients, it's Nestle's and McDonald's and Unilever and Hershey's and Burger King, because they realize that the consumers in Europe are more educated about GMOs than those in the United States. In fact, back on February 16th, 1999, the gag order was lifted on a scientist who had been working to find out how to test for the safety of GMOs under a UK government grant. and his protocols were supposed to be implemented into the EU regulatory scheme for the approval process of GMOs until he accidentally discovered that the very process of genetic engineering was inherently safe. Irrespective of what gene you insert, the process causes such collateral damage to the plant's own DNA that it can, in the case of his rats, it caused potentially precancerous cell growth, smaller brains, livers, and testicles, partial atrophy of the liver, and damaged immune system in just 10 days.
Wow.
Well, when he went public with his concerns, he was fired from his job after 35 years, silenced with threats of a lawsuit, and they never implemented his protocols. Instead, they embarked on a campaign to destroy his reputation, and he was unable to defend himself until February 16th, 1999. At that point, more than 700 articles were written in the UK press alone about genetic engineering within a single month, and according to one observer, it divided society into two warring blocks. And this over-awareness, this hyper-attention on GMOs by the media and by the public forced the tipping point of consumer rejection and forced the hand of the food companies to all line up and acknowledge and commit that they would not use genetically engineered ingredients in Europe. Mm-hmm. But the same companies that removed it in Europe 10 years ago or more continue to sell it to the unsuspecting American public, and it's unlabeled here, and most Americans don't even know that they're eating a GMO. Yeah. And so the fact that California's Prop 37 would out GMOs to the public, they would be aware that they were what's genetically engineered and what's not, and that 53% of Americans say they would avoid eating a GMO if it were labeled. This has gotten the food industry, and in particular the biotech industry, up in arms, and they're spending over $40 million, over $1 million a day, to disinform California people, to pretend that labeling is going to cost more money, even though it didn't raise prices in Europe, to pretend that Prop 37 is going to lead to lawsuits, and it's specifically written not to pretend that it's going to hurt farmers and small businesses, and of course it won't. So they have actually dropped the lead of Prop 37 from more than 2 to 1 to only ahead by 2 points, with a week to go in the election. So it'll be very interesting to see if the disinformation campaign or the truth wins out in California.
Right. Well, we'll do all that we can with this. It's it's tough to be fighting against the most powerful corporations in the world, but we'll do what we can. So they've spent, hundreds of millions, as you said, to keep us from even knowing which food contain GMOs. And after spending most of my adult life as a business consultant, I'm quite certain that large corporations wouldn't be spending millions to cover something up unless they had something to hide.
Absolutely.
And so, keeping that in mind, what are the biggest dangers of GMOs in your mind from like the macro environmental perspective, and then we can kind of whittle it down to people as individuals?
Okay. Well, I first should mention that the movie, which describes a lot of this genetic roulette, the gamble of our lives, is free through Election Day at geneticroulettemovie.com. So for online screening, people can see the details, and you can hear the experiences of the doctors, the patients, the farmers, the veterinarians talk about when humans and animals get rid of GMOs, what improves. And it's a very interesting list. So I'd actually like to start with the health for a moment and then go to the environment, because I think it has more power when you talk about it that way. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine evaluated the animal feeding studies in 2009 and said that the animals are suffering from disorders and diseases that are clearly caused by the genetically engineered feed. They didn't mince words, they said causal. And they described the categories of reproductive disorders, immune system problems, accelerated aging, organ damage, gastrointestinal problems, and dysfunctional regulation of cholesterol and insulin. They urged all doctors to prescribe non-GMO diets, asked the government for a moratorium, and weighed in on labeling. Now, we have seen now thousands of doctors prescribing non-GMO diets to their patients, and we have interviewed many doctors and patients, and the people are getting better from a wide variety of diseases and disorders. In fact, as I've traveled up and down California in the last 3 months, I asked the audience how many of you are getting rid of GMOs and how many of you are noticing improvements in your health. What improvements? We're seeing reproductive problems, gastrointestinal problems, organ damage, accelerated aging, the same categories that the animals are suffering from that were described by the American Academy of Environmental Medicine.
Right.
Now we're also talking to the farmers and veterinarians, and they're seeing the same improvements in their livestock who switch from GM soy to non-GM soy or the corn as well. And these same disorders are on the rise in the U.S. population. So you have a host of gastrointestinal disorders, a host of inflammatory-based disorders, diabetes, overweight problems, acne, skin problems, etc. And these are reported by patients who get better when they switch to non-GMO diets.
Wow.
Now, we can see that the characteristics of the two major GMO crops are logically linked to these same disorders. You have the Bt toxin, which in itself is considered an allergen and also a toxin in that it drills holes in human cells. We already discussed how that could be relating to the gastrointestinal problems and also the immune system problems and the organ damage.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the Roundup, which we discussed as related to organ damage in the study released last month, as well as the reproductive disorders, because the mice and rats that were fed Roundup-ready soy and corn had changed testicles, changed uterus, ovaries, the DNA functioned differently in the embryo offspring. More than half the babies died within 3 weeks in one study. By the third generation, the hamsters lost the ability to have babies. They also had 4 or 5 times the infant mortality. Some had hair growing in their mouths. Mice had fewer babies and smaller babies. Really dramatic and astounding reproductive disorders lodged with Roundup-ready crops. So we have this very interesting thing where the types of crops are easily linked to the types of diseases and disorders which are on the rise in the U.S. population since GMOs were introduced. Now, having said that, one of the worst problems about GMOs is not the health problems, but the fact that it is a self-propagating pollution of the gene pool that exists on a permanent basis because it self-propagates, because it is a situation where the pollen can transfer from GM to non-GM to relatives, to weeds, etc., can end up in the soil microorganisms.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, the genes already released today can outlast the effects of global warming and nuclear waste.
Yeah.
So we're in a situation where we are taking this extremely dangerous element for health and then multiplying it and then bestowing it, foisting it on all future generations without any level of responsibility or oversight.
Right. And you can't really predict what's going to happen with all of this stuff in 3 weeks or 3 months or even 3 years. You know, you look at Pottinger's cats and studies like that where you see the effects on humans can take generations. And obviously humans live a lot longer than rats do, and they reproduce at a different rate. So a lot of these effects may become more and more pronounced as time goes on.
And the mechanism is still being understood. This whole concept of epigenetics, where you can feed a pregnant mouse some nutrients and change the color of the hair of the future generations of those mice, that's being understood now, where the changes that we have in our bodies because of the food we eat might affect our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, irrespective of the food they eat.
Yeah.
So it's a very scary thing when we're making fundamental changes to the most intelligent aspect of nature within the food that we eat that changes the very programming of this food. And we're also learning from recent studies that the RNA of food helps program the expression of the genes in us, so that it actually is like with the old ancient Ayurvedic understanding that food carries intelligence that enlivens the intelligence within us.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that played out in a scientific basis, where the actual sequence of the DNA in the food that we eat is influencing the expression of our genes and our health. And if we're changing that sequence through genetic engineering in ways that we don't fully understand and don't even evaluate before they go on the market, who knows what we're doing to the expression of our health in this and future generations.
Right. So can we talk a little bit about what's happened with the history of GMOs? And it's not a very long history, but there are things like the flavor saver tomato and the GMO potato. These things aren't on the market anymore. What happened?
Well, the flavor saver tomato came on the market as the first genetically engineered crop. I happen to know Dr. Belinda Martineau, who did the safety studies for that, and she just came out today with an article in favor of labeling. She has cut ranks broken ranks with the biotech juggernaut, saying this stuff is not being properly tested. This stuff is not being handled in a responsible way, and people need to be informed. It's interesting about those flavor saver tomatoes. They fed them to rats, and the rats refused to eat them. And so they had to force feed the rats. And this, by the way, turns out to be a common experience reported by farmers, veterinarians, and reporters around this country and around the world, that a variety of animals, when given choice, refuse the genetically engineered feed. And this includes cows, pigs, squirrels, geese, elk, deer, raccoons, mice, rats, buffalo, chickens, and dogs.
Wow.
So we have to get humans up to the level of animals. So the flavor saver tomato was taken off the market by 1997 because it was mushy and tasteless, and so it was a marketing flop. The potato that produced its own pesticide was taken off the market in 2001 because McDonald's rejected it, which should give you a pause if something that McDonald's rejected. And now we have, from 1996, the majors of soy, corn, cotton, and canola, and then more recently, sugar from sugar beets and alfalfa used for animal feed. The other three crops are Hawaiian and Chinese papaya, zucchini, and crookneck squash. Now, it's most of the papaya from China and Hawaii, and a smaller percentage is zucchini and crookneck squash, and these are genetically engineered to resist certain plant viruses. But when they put the viral genes into the plant, these genes might produce viral proteins, and more than 100 studies show that viral proteins can compromise our ability to resist infection by viruses and can also be toxic. And this has not been tested. So eating these genetically engineered fruits and vegetables may end up causing people to have more viral infections or other types of diseases.
That's so weird. This is kind of an off-the-cuff question, but I'm just curious, looking ahead a few hundred years maybe, do you envision a way that we could ever engineer foods to be healthier than they otherwise would be?
Yes. I don't see, I don't have any impetus to say that we can't work with the DNA in some future generation where we understand the mechanics, where we understand the subtle properties of the DNA. But right now, we are babes in the woods. I talked to a Monsanto scientist years ago. I just happened to be in a workshop with him for something else, and we had lunch together. I didn't realize he was a Monsanto scientist. And I said, when you insert a gene into the DNA, you disrupt and destroy parts of that DNA. How do you know that you're not disrupting or destroying an important sequence? He said, well, we're learning more and more which sequences are important. I'm thinking, that's good. But then I said, well, what happens if the entire sequence is important? What happens if it's using quantum mechanics or quantum field effects that we don't fully understand and have no way of evaluating the impact on the plant or on the health of those that eat the plant? And he stopped talking. He just looked down at his plate and continued to eat. And a couple of minutes later, he said, well, we need genetic engineering to feed the world. And, of course, we know that that's a lie created by the public relations firms and not even believed by the senior people at Monsanto. So he was unable to respond to that. But it gives you an idea of the gap of knowledge. We are redefining what DNA is and what genes are. Scientists told me that in his classes, it used to be that it took one day to describe a gene. Now it takes a whole semester because it's so much more complicated than anyone ever thought, and yet our model for genetic engineering is based on the old, obsolete, false model, which causes massive damage and changes that we can't track. So eventually, in hundreds of years perhaps, I have no idea. I'm not against the possibility that we might be able to manipulate the DNA for the betterment of health and environment. But today is not that day.
Right. It's such a nascent thing. And like you said, there's an assumption out there that we as or scientists understand 100% about what we're doing right now. And that's it's a comforting thought, but it is so far from the truth. We didn't even know what, for example, vitamins were until quite recently, like the turn of the century. We're still discovering food substances, and there is so much that we don't know, and we're really messing with it right now.
And the thing is, the level of arrogance we've built into science and the industries that use science as a tool for convincing the public and regulators that it's as if every previous generation got it wrong, but now we're sitting on the top of the mountain.
Right.
And basically everything that we're looking at now will be replaced by better science. And so everything we're looking at now is, to some extent, wrong. But the key is with genetic engineering, whatever we get wrong gets multiplied. It affects the entire population who eat. It affects all living beings, and it affects all future generations. So you'd think that before deploying such a dangerous technology with unprecedented risk, they would have extinguished all possible doubts.
Right.
But it was exactly the opposite. There was huge doubts. There was warnings being bandied about by the FDA scientists. We've seen the 44,000 secret internal memos of the FDA because they had to make them public because of a lawsuit. And the scientists were angry at the political appointees for pretending that GMOs were no different and therefore did not require safety studies. So they were willing to make one of perhaps the biggest risk in the history of human civilization by releasing these into the food supply and environment and doing it with very little support from science.
Jeez. So let's talk a little bit about what people can do about this. If you're on the road, say, and you go into a restaurant, someone orders you a plate of food, say it's fast food. You look down at the plate. What are you looking at from a genetic engineering perspective?
Well, if it's fast food, they wouldn't order it for me. If it's fast food, it's going to have soybeans in it. It's going to have corn in it. It's going to have sugar in it. It may have canola and cottonseed oil. And if it has animal products, it'll be from animals that have been fed soy, corn, cotton, canola, or alfalfa. And so it will be genetically engineered. So if you go out to eat, you go to a restaurant that cooks from scratch, and a lot of the GMOs are visible. Corn is visible in a lot of things. You get polenta, corn on the cob, chips, etc. Soy is visible in tofu, and you can generally find out if it has soy sauce used. But the invisible GM ingredients in a restaurant that cooks from scratch are primarily sugar, salad dressing, and most important, cooking oil. The cooking oil is usually soy or canola. Sometimes they mix canola with olive oil. Those are genetically engineered, not the olive oil, but the canola and soy. Sometimes they use corn oil. I found a restaurant that even used cottonseed oil.
Wow.
Those are genetically engineered. So I always ask, what oil do you cook with, and can you cook mine in a pure olive oil or butter or something that's not genetically engineered, or no oil? And that's one way that I help navigate through restaurants.
Yeah.
Now, you asked what to do. There's really two levels of what to do. There's how to protect ourselves and our family, and we make that easy through non-GMOshoppingguide.com, but also what we can do collectively to reclaim a non-GMO food supply. And for that, I'd like to recommend listeners go to responsibletechnology.org, where there's a whole series of packages for activists, educators, etc. There's free views online of videos and audios. There's a free newsletter. You can get speaker training. You can sign up to get more regular dispatches for social media activism. You can sign up for the Tipping Point Network to join with others in your area to collectively educate your community. We're now organizing healthcare practitioners to focus just to other healthcare practitioners and patients. We're organizing for parents, especially moms. We're organizing for religious outreach. So we've been working overtime at our nonprofit to help people answer that second question, what we can do. And I think that by educating people about the health dangers, we are in fact helping to generate the early signs of a tipping point in the United States. I think that as little as 5% of U.S. shoppers avoiding brands that contain GM ingredients would be sufficient to create the kind of tipping point and rejection of GMOs that forced them out of Europe. We saw the rejection by Walmart and Starbucks, Yoplait and Dannon, of bovine growth hormone. That was Monsanto's drug that's linked to production of high amounts of cancer-promoting hormones in the milk. So that's been kicked out of most American dairies. We think that as little as 5% of U.S. shoppers avoiding all GMOs will do the same for all GMOs in the U.S. And so I think that's been happening. We see non-GMO labels as one of the fastest growing label claims in America in the last 3 years. We've seen 19 states introduce labeling bill legislation. It's all been knocked down by Monsanto's threats and lobbying, but the fact that 19 states have introduced it, that's a sign of a tipping point. So the good news is I think we're actually rallying to the cry now, protecting like as if we're Earth's immune system rising up to protect nature and say, no, this has to stop.
Yeah, yeah. And so we're just about out of time, but before we go, can you talk a little bit about California Proposition 37?
Yes, Prop 37 is a very simple, well-written proposition that simply requires that if a manufacturer uses genetically engineered ingredients, that it's labeled on the panel, or on the ingredient, above the ingredient panel, and that this goes into effect July 1st, 2014, giving companies time to change their labels, which they often do anyway, or to remove GMOs if they want to, so they won't have to label.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that does not require oversight by the California government. In fact, the government suggests that the highest amount of expenditure that would ever spend on overseeing it was as little as 2.7 cents per Californian. And it is not something that is set up to generate lawsuits or to generate, frivolous activities of these trial lawyers. So these are some of the statements made by the no on 37, that it'll cause lawsuits, that it'll raise prices, that that it's bad for farmers, etc., and all that's false. So this is it's pivotal, because if the companies remove GMOs for the California market, or they label GMOs for the California market, it's so big, they're probably going to have one package and one set of ingredients for the whole country.
Yeah.
So this is really a national issue being fought out in California, and we'll see what happens on November 6th. Right now, the polls say that the yes on 37 is still 2 points ahead of the no on 37, but the margin of error puts that in a dead heat.
Yep.
And so people around the country are volunteering and calling in to California voters, telling them the truth, because the other side is spending $1 million a day on false advertising and direct mail pieces.
Right. And even if it doesn't go through, this is not the end of the fight.
Of course not. In fact, this is an illustration of the rising tide against GMOs in the United States. So the tide is rising, the concern is growing, and whether or not we win at the ballot box, I think we are going to win at the supermarket cash register, and that's where it's going to have the biggest impact. Excellent,
excellent. Well, we're out of time, but before we go, can you tell folks where to find you online?
Sure. I'm going to give you some websites here. The first website is responsibletechnology.org. That's our Institute for Responsible Technology, nonprofit organization. And we have non-GMOshoppingguide.com. Also the iPhone and iPad application Shop No GMO. We have, for the watch the movie free online till Election Day, it's called geneticroulettemovie.com. And for books, DVDs, and CDs, you can go to seedsofdeception.com. So that's a lot of websites, but they all have different purposes, and it's helping people to have safe, healthier choices.
Awesome. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming on. This is a really important issue, and we appreciate you sharing the knowledge with us.
I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to share with your listeners who are very concerned about health and fitness, and what we say is healthier eating starts with no GMOs.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you so much for listening to the Fat Burning Man Show. If you like what you hear, please take a minute to leave a review on iTunes. And if you'd like to learn more about GMOs, it's certainly something I'll be talking about quite a bit more on upcoming episodes. And I'll also put all the links that Jeffrey Smith mentioned on the show in the show notes at fatburningman.com. So I highly encourage you to check it out. This is very important stuff. We have just a couple weeks left before I'm back in Austin, Texas. Can't wait to be back to my home and real desk and recording studio there. But in the meantime, I'll still be bringing shows to you. So until next week, be well. Talk to you guys soon. Cheers.